Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Puppet Time Online. I'm your host, Eric Wright. Puppet Time Online is your chance to sit down with some of the puppetry community's finest and me to find out what they know about. As usual, we're brought to you by the Puppet Kitchen, which does it all from designing and building to performing and coaching. Puppet Kitchen is your connection to amazing puppetry.
Yes.
Thanks. I have Katie here, as always, running the show, keeping things on track and running smoothly.
I'm your Ed McMahon.
Yeah. Give us a good Ed McMahon laugh, Katie. God, it's like he's here. So we want to hear from you during the show. If you have comments or questions for either me or my guest, make sure to put them down in the chat. We're on YouTube and Facebook Live and Twitch, I think. So be sure to chime in. Katie will make sure that we catch everything, and you can be a part of the show. I'm really excited for our guest today. Not only is he an incredible theater maker and puppeteer, also a Sarah Lawrence alum, he's a great teaching artist, also a fellow podcaster. I guess you could call what we do a little bit of a podcast.
Well, we're not on pods.
We're a vidcast.
We're a vidcast.
And our guest today is an actual podcaster. You can find his podcast, Puppet Pod, wherever fine podcasts are found. Please welcome to the show today, Josh Rice. Hi, Josh.
Yes, you are correct, sir.
That's so much better.
Just doing a little Ed McMahon since you brought it up, you know. What's up? How's it going?
I'm doing great. I'm really happy to have you here.
Thanks. I'm good. I'm really glad to be here. And yeah, it's exciting to chat with y'all today.
So to get us started, and I'm sure you've answered this question a bunch of times, but we always like to start with how you got into puppetry. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about how you got here.
Yeah, casual interest growing up, of course, and a big fan of the Muppet Show. My parents watched it growing up in the 80s. And
where did you grow up?
In Perry, New York, a very tiny town in between Buffalo, Rochester, where there are more cows than humans. So super rural, didn't know what theater was growing up. But the Muppet Show would come on, and it was just, to me, like the most entertaining thing to see this, like, one character trying to, like, hold everybody together and, like, keep the show going. And, like, even then, I really kind of was like, oh, I want to be Kermit the Frog. And then I kind of went out of my worldview because I just didn't really have any other avenues to see it other than, you know, commercial Henson-y things. Mm-hmm. And then I got the chance I worked in a children's theater for about 7 years as a company member. So just constantly doing shows, and one of which was a puppet version of The Ugly Duckling, which was like my first chance at real like performance of puppetry in a show, with like multiple runs and things. But even then, we were just trying to figure it out as we went, you know, and it was a lot of like hand puppet work.
Sure.
And then I came to grad school at Sarah Lawrence in 2012, and then you meet, you know, of course, Dan Hurlin and Tom Lee and Lake Simons and this whole world of contemporary puppetry for adults, and this whole history dating back 3,000 years of puppetry comes into your world, and, you know, I was just transfixed. It was one of those moments where, I don't know if you've felt this, Eric, but you know, when you start to like do a thing, like I started like, you know, working a 3-person puppet, like Bunraku style in Dan's class. And there was like this moment of intuitive knowing, like I recognize this. I'm learning this for the first time, but also like I know this thing somehow, you know, and I was like a very physical performer in the first place. So I think to be able to find this other way of performing, and especially one where you become secondary, even tertiary to like the object, which is primary. That was really exciting for me, who was for years, children's theater and like Shakespeare. So like large ass performance style to something much smaller and like less about you was like amazing. So that's kind of the long story about my puppet origin story.
That's great. Okay, so the other thing that I'm always really curious about with our guests is, now that you are in the puppetry community, what keeps you in puppetry?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, it's certainly not the money. I think that's one of the first things Dan tells you, like, when you first get into it. He's like, I hope you're doing this because you love it, because you're never going to make money doing it. You'll spend a lot, though, to make your tiny little show happen. I think it's one of the first things. My dad is waving to me from my storefront windows. He's walking by outside. One of the things I really loved about it, and I think I still love about it, is I never felt like I was truly an artist until I started working on Puppet Works, because, as you know, you're not just a puppeteer. It's like total making, it's building and design and directing and dramaturgy and dance and visual art all combined into one thing. And, when I finally got to get in the shop with Dan and design a thing and measure it and cut it and paint it and then see how it worked with the puppet and, tinker until it did work with the puppet. That's when I felt truly like, oh, this is what I feel like being an artist really is. Like, it's well-rounded and, you're really doing all of it. And I think that's what keeps bringing me back even now is, it feels like it pushes me and stretches me in ways that I really like, as a creator and as a maker, as a performer, as a director, all of those things. And the magic of it, like if for just that moment you can believe that this object is actually breathing and alive, it's one of those last forms of magic we still have in this like very digital, screen world. Yeah. It's so nice to have that analog magic thing still. Yeah. So I think those are the couple of reasons.
That's great. I'm really curious about, you mentioned you were a really physical performer and that puppetry was sort of your way into a more nuanced performance. I hear a lot that, puppetry is great for shy kids or like people who never came out of their shell and they found their voice through puppetry. And I don't think you really hear a lot about people who maybe like you and me who are like big and bold and brash and like big physical performers who like really feel like their voice comes through an object. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about, that transition and sort of diverting your like skills you learned as a performer into another object.
Yeah, I think when I went to grad school at Sarah Lawrence, I was tired of acting. And I felt like it just wasn't doing enough for me anymore. It also just felt like, I don't know, I felt I was, it just was a selfish art form. And I wasn't really like, contributing much to my community either. And I think I made the choice when I went to grad school to try to do as many different things and push myself to try new things as possible. So some of that was like, I'm not going to be an actor anymore. I'm going to like really focus on other things because I've done that. I'm also going to try to find more design elements in my work and then also figure out a little bit more theater outreach and how I can help people, with this work. Mm-hmm. And I think I became a better actor because of it. Because again, Shakespeare, children's theater is so big, it's so physical. And my performance style, I think, reflected that almost all the time. I also did a lot of improv too, which is also tends to be pretty large.
Sure.
And puppetry, because you're asked to pull back so much, to not express with your own face, to not make any noise, to communicate with just your body, to make this one thing work so everybody else is doing the same thing with you at the same time, it really gave me more understanding of nuance and that you can do so much more with so much less. And, it's economy of movement, right? I think in puppetry, we know that if it gets too cluttered or if there's like extra things, it's not clear to the audience what we're trying to express with that gesture or that movement. And that then translating to me again as a performer that is front and center and primary, saying words and moving around a stage, the ability to lean into nuance more. Like, I hate to think that it took me 15 years into my career to find that, but I think it's true. It's
a really hard thing to do. I think a lot of people underestimate how difficult it is to do almost nothing on stage.
Yeah, and it's captivating, right?
Yeah.
We can watch a puppet breathe and be entranced, and that's all it's doing. And or sit down and stand up, like, and it's fascinating, right? So how can I make that also similarly interesting? You don't have to do so much because the word and the costume and the choreo and the set and the lights, they do so much already. And, it's bringing that filmic quality to performance, I think, that puppetry does a really nice job of. I think in those ways, like, it really helped. And I actually got to teach a class in this at the University of Rochester. They have this incredible international theater program. And I got to teach a workshop on puppetry for performers, for people that are primarily actors. How can you transition or translate some of these ideas in puppetry performance and then put them on your work as an actor later on?
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Do you feel like your training as a physical performer changed how you thought about how to approach puppetry?
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, I have to admit, like, I never really had a traditional theater training. I didn't go to a conservatory. I just kind of took like a bunch of classes in a bullshit titled liberal arts degree to graduate in 4 years. So I was like really interested in so many things, but I didn't have like, your basics up to the higher level courses to then this and this and this. I was just really like doing it. I just did shows. I worked in a company. It was that work in the children's theater that really was like my real training. And that's where I got to like figure out how to make a character from the outside in, how to really like get into it through movement first and physicality. So in translating that to puppetry, like one of the things that I really love is like figuring out the body mechanics about how I sit down or, someone else in the room on your puppet team sits and how then to make the puppet best do it based on what it can biomechanically do,
right.
And how it's engineered. And then what we want it to look like, within the story or whatever we're doing. Yeah. So being able to approach it in that way, that kind of kinesthetic understanding of movement was really exciting for me. And like I had mentioned earlier, like a thing that I, somehow knew, but to, have the one-to-one of like Dan Hurlin say, watch this person run around outside in the, the quad of Sarah Lawrence.
Right.
And then really understand where weight is being placed and balance is. And then how do you then go back inside, grab the object and make it do that same way of running? Yeah. That to me was like so exciting.
That's really cool. I noticed that a lot of the performances that you do, a lot of the shows that you're a part of, use that bunraku style or tabletop technique. Do you think there's something that draws you to that style in particular?
I think part of it is having never seen it before and like really getting introduced to puppetry in like a real way as a manipulator or performer. It was just like the thing that I gravitated to. It was hard. Tabletop puppetry is difficult. And it requires so much coordination with your fellow puppeteers, but also like that thing that handspring puppetry talks about. They like give that list of like, 13 rules for puppetry, and one of which is puppetry is pain. And, for any like people that have done it, you're asked to like stand in a very difficult position holding an object and make sure that it stays alive and you don't drop that thing and you hold that position with your arm extended for X amount of time. Right. to your own physical expense at times. And being able to like endure that in a way that you can continually do it throughout a performance run,
Right.
to me is exciting. Like, I love that kind of like,
That challenge.
I don't know, challenge, yeah, and exercise and use of my body, you know, in those ways. If it bothers you, then how do I find a smarter way? How do I, you know, rely on some of the Alexander training from grad school to like figure out how to do that and not hurt later?
Yeah.
You know, economy of movement and economy of, you know, body use, I guess, in order to be a long-standing performer. Because then you hear those stories of like Tom Lee on Warhorse and like, and many of those puppeteers who had physical therapists there and masseuses there ready to like help them out so they could run a show for that.
We have physical therapists on call for Little Shop too. Like it should be, I think, an essential part of any long running, you know, production with puppetry. But yeah, those, I mean, like that Warhorse especially is just like such an incredibly physically demanding show in ways that you wouldn't expect, because the movements are novel. You know, like the movement, the repetitive movement on an actor's body is, you know, novel.
Well, I thought, you know, in addition to watching the Muppets growing up, I watched a lot of professional wrestling.
Nice.
And part of that was because I loved the physical feats of it. I still do. Like, I think professional wrestling is like absurdist theater at its finest.
Sure.
And the physical feats of athleticism are so interesting to me. And I was never like particularly sporty, but theater has been an outlet for athletic feats for me. And puppetry, I feel like, is similarly that, where you're really extending your body to, you know, pull off a very precise thing.
Right.
And, you know, I always thought it would be really fun to like create a workout based in puppetry for people who have no idea like what we do, because you could really like put them through the ringer to like make sure you hit this particular spot in this particular moment, and then you hold it and then extend this, and then, you know, it's like core work and arm work and leg work and like all of these things. But, you know, it's again like responding to that physical desire, you know, in some ways of like wanting to be an athlete, but not really being a traditional one in a sense. But, you know, a physical performer, I feel like, is that in so many ways. And, you know, anybody that watches like Cirque stuff, you could see those performers are athletes for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, in addition to being a performer, you know, you are, and a theater maker, you are a producer. You make all of, you know, you're responsible for the Shake on the Lake festival and the New York State Puppet Festival upstate. How do you make that what was your transition from performer to producer?
I guess it started when I first moved to Arkansas, which was in, I know, everybody goes to make it big in theater in Arkansas. And
that old chestnut.
You know, he has a classic old tale. But when I first went down there in 2004, you know, I had a full contract to do nothing but make theater for 10 months, right? So I was like, yeah, I'll take it. Having no idea how long I'd ever be there. But in knowing that I was going down there, you know, I was really into improv comedy and kind of worked with the Equity Theater up here in Rochester for a while. And knew when I went down there, like, I wanted to find a group, but there wasn't one. So I had to figure out how to start one, how to find a theater, how to promote it, how to, you know, run a bank, how to run front of house, you know, all of the things. And that was kind of like my first real kind of producing experience, just kind of doing it on my own. I wanted the thing, so I decided to make the thing, you know, and my mom kind of always taught me that, you know, if you're not happy where you are, you know, do what you need to do to make yourself happy. Make it happen, you know. It's kind of like this cheesy Hallmark slogan, but she always said, bloom where you are planted. And I always kind of carried that with me, you know. So when 2012 rolled around, I was getting ready to go to grad school. I also wanted to find a way to be able to come home and perform, on this like beautiful lake that we have that I grew up on. And there was like this natural sloping lawn down to the lake with an expansive view. It was like a natural amphitheater. So it's like, cool, I want to perform here. I want to be home more. Let's make a show. Let's do an outdoor Shakespeare festival. That's what I knew. So again, it's learning like, oh, right, you have to learn how to write grants. You have to remember to buy porta potties for public events. You got to have insurance. You got to figure out how to write contracts. Then you become a nonprofit, and then you got to have a board, and then you have to learn Robert's rules to, run a board meeting. It's like endless things. But the joy of that too is, you are answering to yourself ultimately in your community, the other artists that you're providing work for who are achieving the vision you have for your community. And with the Puppet Festival, that was just kind of an extension of all these things, whereby we were offered a really generous grant to take over an abandoned storefront here on our main street in Perry. Typical like 90s story of small town America where the main street empties out and there's like, not much going on.
Sure.
And one of the goals of this grant program was to bring artists back to the local area and take over some of these like main street buildings and bring them to life. And, I never really wanted a theater space necessarily, and Shake was itinerant forever up until 2017.
Right.
So then we got this grant. But I knew that if we were going to get the grant, I also knew that part of that money I wanted to use to start a puppet festival. And we, again, in the producing of it, right, you figure out what you need in order to make a puppet show happen, right, which is ideally light control, because Shake on the Lake is all outdoors and natural light. Yeah. So like indoors, cool, we get some light control. We need some projectors for some of the performances. We need chairs. We need, a Marley floor. And then you figure out how to like find all of that stuff. And then curating the performances and performers that you think can help make this a success, right? So like calling in all of your biggest favors to like Dan Hurlin. Dan, can I put up a retrospective of your work at our gallery? Right. Tom and his wife Lisa Gonzalez. Tom Lee, would you come and like put on this piece that you and Lisa have been working on? To Koryu Nishikawa the fifth, this fifth generation Japanese puppet master that I got the pleasure of working with Tom Lee. Being like, Sensei, would you come to my tiny town all the way from Japan and do what you do, right? So when you get those people on board, it's not hard to sell.
Sure.
And then you again figure out how you can get the funding. Thankfully, we had this grant. We found some other grant funding, and then you're off to the races, while also hopefully providing yourself space to make your own work in the process, which tends to get lost in all of this production stuff, right? Sure. You get so caught up with doing everything that you forget about the thing that really got you there in the first place. Is you're an artist and you make work. So how do you find that balance between the two? And that is a continual struggle, I think, for me, is knowing that there are people far more talented to like bring the butts to the seats, so to speak, but also finding ways that I can still like fulfill that need of mine to like express and to create and to make, and hopefully it doesn't feel like too grandstandy of the producer also putting up the producer's work. Like how do you find that balance too, because you never want to take advantage of that thing. So it's been really interesting to cultivate that, and I think a lot of it too was it's hard to make work in New York, right? And you gotta plug away for at least 10 years, unless you're real lucky, before people start to really notice what you're doing. And this was a really nice chance to bring something to a place that, is very rural here. We're in between Buffalo and Rochester. It's a town of 3,500. But this place can really use an event like this. Mm-hmm. So, I'm also learning about economic development and rural development and creative placemaking, this idea that you can bring people to a place by putting on an event and you make it something, and then everything else in the town benefits, right? The local brewery, the wine bar, the restaurants, the hotels, the B&Bs, whatever, right? And
it's almost as if arts are essential to a place, the success of a location.
It's so interesting.
Hold on a minute.
Interesting thoughts. Yeah, novel in some ways.
Like, so strange.
It's very weird. But, that was never something I thought of, in
Yeah.
getting into puppetry, that's what you would be doing eventually is like helping your town.
Yeah.
But, that's kind of what's been really lovely about being in this rural area, which I'm here part of the time and I'm in Brooklyn some of the time,
Sure.
is that we're bringing things to a place that can really use it. New York doesn't need another puppet festival, but Perry certainly can use an idea like this. And thankfully people came, so that's good too.
How did in that it is in such a small place, you must have a much more immediate feedback from the people who, like, from the town. Are, like, what's the response to people bringing, like, was there any explaining that you had to do, that it was like, it's a theater festival, but it's a puppet festival, and it's gonna be great, X, Y, and Z? Or, like, were people on board with it right from the beginning?
I think some of the initial funders were.
They were on board with it?
They were on board with it because I think they saw the potential, right? We had proof of concept of Shake on the Lake earlier, and I had always been kind of like finding moments to like insert puppetry into like The Tempest, when we would do it, or Midsummer Night's Dream or something like that.
Oh yeah, I think we have a picture of that also.
Yeah. So there was like there it is. There's a Midsummer and the puppets there. From left are, what is that? Peace Blossom, Mustard Seed, and Cobweb, and Titania, right? So this way of like showing people that here's what this can look like, eventually. So you kind of give them that little, like, that moose-bouche of puppetry in the hopes that, eventually they're ready for the meal of puppetry, which is this giant festival. But for audiences, I think part of what we did, similar to when we started Shake, was like, how do you ease them in? Like, you don't just throw them Henry IV Part 1, right? Like, they're not going to get it, nor do I want to fucking make that, Sorry.
Yeah.
But, you introduce it with something fun, like a comedy of errors, right? It's physical, it's big, it's silly. People can understand how that show works, right? Or Midsummer Night's Dream. Similarly to puppetry, it's like, come see this opening exhibition of Dan's work. That was the first event that we had. And then we showed the documentary Puppet.
Yeah.
Which is like the documentary about Dan's making of a show that you worked on, right? Dis Farmer.
Dis Farmer.
And, how that worked, the process of making it work. So people can really see like, oh, that's what that 3-foot puppet does in action, right? Because a puppet on display is different from a puppet in action, right? A puppet is made to move. So you get to see what it's supposed to do. You're seeing a real process. You're seeing that it is a big deal because Dan's reviewed in the New York Times, right? And these like really incredible puppeteers are making it come to life.
Right.
So the community now is like, oh, okay, now I see what this is. I'm ready to engage with the other things that you're about to show us, right? And puppetry is a little weird. I think we all recognize that in some ways.
That's fine. It's a fair thing to say.
Yeah, but weird in ways that we like, right? That we celebrate weird. And how do you get the audience to also celebrate that same sort of like different performance style, quality, form? And you have shadow, and that's what we showed them. We showed them projection and live feed miniatures. We showed them dance and puppetry talking together. We showed them more traditional narratives. We showed them non-linear narratives, all of the different things that exist in this world of contemporary puppetry for adults, but also like shows for kids. And people came out, we drew, in 10 days, we drew 2,300 people to a town of 3,500.
That's incredible.
So, for us, that is like a big win and a big success and proof that it does work, right? And all of our fellow businesses, that we really love, like the local brewery, are like, thank you. People came after the show and then they talked about the thing and they bought beer and it was awesome. And, on down the line for the local businesses. So, I think, again, you hope that people are going to buy into it. Same with any show you make, right? You know it's good. You believe in it. You do it with conviction. And you hope that the audience responds, to that conviction. Because if nothing else, they'll feel your passion for it.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. Do you feel like being a theater maker, or more specifically being a puppeteer, had an influence on how you thought about being a producer?
You know, I haven't actually ever thought about that. That's a really great question. I think now, yeah. I think before, you know, it's like it's like remembering when I wanted to be Kermit, holding it all together.
I was gonna say
That's what it's like, really, right? You're like trying to keep
sounds like
everybody
you're
cool, you know, like keeping the divas cool. You're trying to keep, you know, Gonzo from blowing up the stage or whatever. There's a lot of that, really. Like, that's when I feel like the most, like, puppetry is, like, interweaving in this world. You know, I'm doing my best to hold it all together and, like, pull back as much as I can and let everybody else go forward and, like, you know, celebrate these incredible artists and give them what they need and hopefully making them comfortable and fulfilled at the same time and feeling like they also have ownership in this thing. So that's kind of mostly how I feel as a producer is like
Sure.
Kermit the Frog. But also, I guess, like, similarly, it's this idea too of like taking a backseat to it. You know, how do you let the thing be the thing and you are, you know, over here way on the side. So hopefully, like, we're celebrating what you're seeing on stage, you know, these artists that are graciously giving their time to come to this rural place. And, you know, me getting to step back, which is like a real luxury too, right? I don't have to, like, wear the performer hat and all these other hats at the same time now. I can maybe just do the producer hat, and that feels great too, you know. For my life, it feels really great, and my sanity and my girlfriend, you know. Like, right. I get to be around and not working all the time. So that's been really nice too, is this, like, secondary focus on myself, you know, as a producer.
Mm-hmm. Well, one of the other things that you have also produced relatively recently is this puppet podcast, the Puppet Pod.
Yeah.
Which you guys have now, I think, almost 20 episodes. Is that right?
That's exactly right. Yeah, we. I wanted to do a podcast for a long time. I just didn't know, like, what exactly it would be on, and because we had to postpone the 2020 New York State Puppet Festival, we wanted to figure out a way that we could still create some sort of content, and this was a great moment to, you know, pivot and figure out how to make a podcast work and talk to some of these incredible artists that have shaped me over the years, that I've gotten to know over the years, to get to know for the first time, and, you know, figure out how to make it interesting and translate, you know, as you well know, how do you make an art form that is primarily visual work in this auditory way or in, like, a YouTube channel way, right? Because we have to rely so much on description to hopefully get people there, but also you're talking to other people that are like you, right? Multi-hyphenate makers who, like, get being producer, director, designer, performer, you know, and that's been really awesome, is to really dig into other people's process and how they, you know, get to this place of making puppet shows. Yeah.
Do you focus the show in any particular, like, are you consciously focusing the show in any particular place, like process, or like getting to know the people individually?
You know, I think it's a bit of a balance of both of those things. You know, we always start with, I think puppetry, you know, is, and they fill in the blank. And then another Dan Herlinism, you know, when you're in a process with Dan, he'll often look at you and say, puppetry is hard. And it is. And getting people to fill in the blank of that, right? Which is, puppetry is hard because, you know. And then you get into, like, the conversation, which is like, what is your puppet origin story? Yeah. How do you identify as an artist, as a puppeteer? Because often a lot of, I think, puppet theater makers aren't just puppeteers, right? They would consider themselves a multi-hyphenate of something, right?
Yeah.
And then, you know, why they are interested in this form and why they make the work that they make, and getting into, you know, maybe a specific show or something they're working on currently. and that's really exciting to me too, is kind of letting the conversation, having like your 5 questions that, you know, you want to try to dig into with this particular artist, but also leaving room for it to just kind of organically flow, which has been really nice. And I had to learn a little bit more of like letting the conversation lead you, which for some people like is awesome and will organically happen. And then there are other people you maybe have to like pull a little bit more out of.
Yeah.
So that was a really good skill to learn too, as an interviewer. Like, how do I make this person look great?
Yeah. I was just going to say, like, how do you feel like the show has changed over the course of these 19 episodes?
I think I'm pushing less, you know, similarly, like as a performer, you know, you're really trying to like maybe sometimes push a little too hard to get the response that you need, and, you know, realizing like, oh, right, you know, people are going to just receive this at home and you're not going to get a response unless they reply on social media. So how do you not overwhelm them by screaming at them through the microphone? Or, you know, whatever else I might rely on is like my pushing behaviors. So, you know, finding that balance too is like, oh, right, how do I, you know, find this puppetry zen in even interviewing people about puppetry?
Mm-hmm. Did you, when you started up a podcast, was there, like, did you do any research? Did you, like, do any active, like, learning about, hey, how do I make this, you know, this particular version of bringing people together as good as it can be?
Yeah, thankfully, I worked with a really great producer, Sarah Stabley, who's kind of like my co-host. Yeah. And she very quickly learned, you know, editing software and how to put this together. And we knew we needed a theme song, which yours is awesome, by the way. Like, I really enjoyed grooving out while I was in the waiting room before we started.
Matt Singer and the Big Littles. Thank
you. It was so good. So finding like a similar one and like trying to give them a feel of like, you know, I want it to sound kind of like Comedy Bang Bang, but not really like Comedy Bang Bang.
Sure.
And then also knowing too, like, I wanted the banter of me and a co-host, you know, and making it not just me. And how do you kind of have that back and forth? How do you break up the segments, you know, and listening to other podcasts? Conan O'Brien Needs a Friend is kind of like a big one that we model some of our stuff after. And then also, like, how do you create like a little bit of like play in it too, which is the Puppet Hot Pot, the thing we do at the very end where we do like rapid fire series of questions, and how do you answer them in a rapid fire way. So, you know, just kind of like pulling from your favorites, and, you know, like we do with most art, right? You steal everything and hope to make it something relatively different with your own style, you know, laid upon it.
Do you, in that same vein, when you mentioned that there was a lot of, when you're becoming a producer, like putting things together, were there resources that you drew on to figure out how to be a producer, or like how to get started, like the things that, just finding out the things that you need?
Yeah.
I know there was a lot of that for the puppet, for me in running a business, just like doing research on how to put a business together was a big learning curve.
Yeah, 100%.
I was wondering like what you use to sort of help get better at being a producer.
Sarah had incredible resources through the Equity Theater in Rochester, Jiva Theater Center. So relying on sound designers there to kind of give us some best practices on podcasting. Just deep Google dives into like microphones that are going to really work, and the best kind of editing equipment. And then how do you record on a Zoom and take the audio in a way that sounds, not so like you're underwater all the time, and fairly, clean. And a lot of that's trial and error, right? We thought we had like a secondary, recording software that worked better, and it turned out it didn't. So you just kind of try it and you see what happens. And, I think as people listen over the course of 19 episodes, you can kind of hear us figuring it out. And some days it's really clean and good, and sometimes you really hear that fan in the 95-degree Brooklyn basement that I live in, cooling you down. And
While you say that, there's a lawnmower outside our
right, exactly,
Yeah,
right.
exactly.
Or your dad walks by the storefront window that you're sitting next to, right? In the little tiny town you live in. But I think, too, we were really lucky to get some funding from Dixon Place.
Oh, yeah, great.
And Dixon Place was a co-producer of the Puppet Pod. So we were really thankful that they were able to provide some funding so we could also, not only pay Sarah for all of the work that she was doing, and then our other eventual editor and producer, Josh Marks, but also the artists. We were able to give them like a little, stipend for appearing, which was something that Dixon Place was really excited that we were able to do. They were really excited that we could pay people something during a pandemic for their time, which, I am such a proponent of as well. So it was really nice to get paid to have a podcast, which, we haven't gotten that Squarespace deal yet. But maybe one day,
Yeah, still working on stamps.com.
Or we were thinking about who are the puppetry supply companies that you really want?
Where do you get the
yeah.
Antron fleece from?
Gotta go to
Yeah.
Puppet Pelts and get them to do an ad, or Canal Rubber.
Yeah, or 3M, or, Scotch tape, or, Olfa knife brand, or
That's
whatever.
why you lie.
Yeah, exactly.
Makers of fine boxes and gap tape for all your puppet needs. Katie, did you have a question you wanted to pop in
Well,
there?
you were just talking about your dad walking by.
Yeah.
And I thought it was timely to point out that Eric's dad is commenting on the podcast.
Yeah.
Hey, what's up, Mr. Wright?
Sometimes thought about that there should be an organization called POP, Parents of Puppeteers. Yeah, we've talked about POP before.
Yeah.
How does your dad is your dad interested in being a parent of a puppeteer?
I'm so thankful my parents have been supportive of all of the things I've done in my life. I'm really lucky in that way. No matter how out of their worldview any of this work I've ever done is, and they come to New York and they see shows, and then some of them are very narrative based. Some of them are very abstract, right? God bless them, they're there for it. And one of my favorite moments is my mom comes to see Dan Hurlin's Demolishing Everything with Amazing Speed.
Right.
Very abstract puppet piece. And my mom said, you know what? This, of all the things you did, was my favorite. I loved the story. And I was like, this was the one where story got you.
Wait,
interesting move, Mary Rice. So yeah, I think my parents would be totally in to be supportive of this because they always have been. There's Demolishing right there. Short-haired baby Josh down there in the bottom right.
Oh my gosh, amazing.
But yeah, it was just so funny to be oh, that's where narrative got you in Dan's piece? Interesting.
Right. Your parents have a depth yet unplumbed in their, in their
Exactly, yeah.
That's great. Yeah.
Jessica's chimed in. Greg,
Hi,
if you're
Jess.
still watching, we've got a Phoenix chapter apparently started.
Okay, great.
So this is going to happen.
Jess's mom, Spencer Lott's mom. Okay, great.
Great.
Well, clearly my dad is already organizing, putting these together.
Great.
That's great.
It's almost like a support group in some ways.
I mean, it must be.
Oh, your son's a puppeteer.
Okay, I
So is
understand. There's so
mine.
few
I get
people in
it.
the world that understand what you've gone through.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I feel, you do a ton of work as a teaching artist as well.
Mm-hmm.
What's your how do you approach the teaching of this thing that you're learning about? How do you? I mean, when I started as a teaching artist, I sort of was recycling lessons that I had learned from Dan, and sort of starting in there. But I wonder, where do you go? Because you've done teaching artist quite a bit in your career.
Yeah.
How do you? I'm always really curious. How do you get good at that? How do you develop that?
Ooh, yeah, a lot of practice, a lot of failure. How do you create a positive learning environment for students to do the same? practice and fail. And hope that they're encouraged enough to keep trying, and that, you know, they're as interested in it because you have enthusiasm about it. And, you know, I think I've always tried to espouse to my students that I'm not an expert. I'm definitely going to make mistakes along the way, you know, but please ask questions. And if I don't know the answer, I'll find it for you, you know, and allowing myself to have that latitude as a teacher but learner with them, I think has really been a useful approach. I think early teaching artist days, when I was very young, you know, like 23, and like running a classroom of young students who were, you know, maybe 5 or 6 years younger than me, you know, feeling like I had to know everything, and you have to listen and you have to try. And it's like, that's not a good way to teach, and that's not how to get people to really like work with you, because it's a collaboration, right? You know, basic rules of improv are like, yes, and, you know, what's happening in the room, and as a teacher you have to do that. And then also make your partner look good, right? Your job is to make the students look great. And if they get it and they have that aha moment, then they make you look good, right? And then there's that constant feedback loop of yes-anding and making each other look good. And then I think you have a productive learning environment. So similar to you, you know, it's recycling Dan lessons, recycling Tom lessons, recycling Lake Simon's lessons, and then figuring out how to best allow students to, you know, learn it and figure it out. And then always allowing yourself to, you know, let the students change your lesson plan based on their needs. And, you know, I was very lucky to get into the New Victory Teaching Artist Ensemble, thanks to our friend Spencer Lott, early on in my career in New York, and learning their approach and a team teaching style, which I really appreciated being able to jump in on and be a part of, and, you know, approaching lessons in a way where your fellow ensemble members and collaborators can, you know, help it grow, and, you know, allow the students to really experience the full breadth of whatever that form is, and really celebrate art form, but also play, and also community, accessibility, all these things that the arts at their best are doing. So I've been lucky to, you know, learn from them and just keep getting opportunities. And, you know, I'm thankful for pre-K opportunities, to university opportunities, to working with seniors, which is some of my favorite work I've ever done, is a puppetry program with seniors with Alzheimer's and dementia, and, you know, working with them to make and build and, you know, hone fine motor and practice fine motor again, but also the socialization in the room, and you know, short-term memory gains come back, and then seeing them perform and getting adulation from an audience and achievements recognition, and like, it's huge. And, you know, that's across the board from pre-K to, you know, the most senior K, right? Like, people need those things, and that's been really a good lesson too as a teacher.
Do you find that different age groups respond to different parts of puppetry or different aspects of putting on puppet shows? What were some surprises that you found in that regard?
I think for certainly young learners, just simple delight, you know, of a thing comes to life, and so much easier to give yourself over to that belief as a younger person, I think. And then for university learners, university level age learners, they really get into like, oh, it's the nitty grittiness of a form with a history and the making of it, and like, you know, there's like such enthusiasm if they have that buy-in to like your enthusiasm about this puppet form. For seniors, I found it was the making, you know, like at first I think a lot of them were like, puppetry, I'm not a kid. And then they get in the room and then they start to like sculpt and paint, and then their imagined design is in front of them, you know, and in full form, and then they start to work it. And, you know, I thought you would have to teach puppetry form, to seniors in the same way that sometimes you do to young people, but you never forget how to play. And as long as you're encouraging people to play, and especially like the senior group, I mean, that never goes away. You put your thing on, and you put a voice on it, and you engage, and you tell stories, and you don't have to worry about eye line or breath, or like those things that we really focus on, I think, in like really or certain types of puppetry processes. Whereas in this room of like seniors who have memory difficulty, just give them the thing and a voice, and they move it around and they make it come to life as well as like anyone else in a different process. So
Sure.
that's been really encouraging too, to watch them respond to those moments.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
That's great. That's really, I mean, I love hearing about that sense of play that really stays with you.
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of people really either forget it or they feel like it's not necessary.
Yeah.
They feel like they shouldn't be developing that muscle, that they shouldn't be developing a sense of play. And it's, such an important skill to hang on to throughout your life, and to like keep that going, because it's so energizing.
Yeah, we're professionals and we approach the work professionally, but man, gotta have a sense of play, I think, in all of it, right? Like,
Yeah.
gosh, otherwise, we're just so serious, and that's not fun.
Yeah.
That's not fun to be around. It's not fun to be in a room with.
Yeah. Do you feel like, this is my last question, because we're like right at the end of all of this, but do you feel like, as a producer now of festivals and of a podcast, and as a teaching artist, how do you also still make your own work? You also maintain that design and build and performance aspect. I'm usually really curious about how puppetry influences those other aspects of your life, but I'm also now, especially with you, really curious as how those other aspects of your life influence your performance or influence your puppetry. How does being a producer make your puppet shows different, or make the work or the stories that you want to tell different?
I think there's a little bit more freedom in a certain way, like, especially if you're self-producing something, like, maybe there isn't as much like worry about someone liking it to get to the next stage of its life, in development, whatever that might be. So there's a little bit of like ease, which is really nice. But I also think, you have a little more tendrils into the world as a producer, to call upon your talented artist friends to like come support and be a part of an ensemble. So again, you're not all on your own anymore.
Yeah.
And I'm lucky in that way, I think, to be able to do that. And I think there's something about really understanding more about what you like, as a curator, as a producer, and why you're responding to those things to bring them to where you are, to produce them, or to talk to these artists, or whatever it is that you respond to as an artist. And then remembering that that's how you make too, is you're influenced by all of the things that you really like and are trying to ingest, and the histories, where they come from, and the fact that, I don't know, puppetry is so image-based, and remembering like, oh, right, that's how I started as a children's theater performer, was like,
Right.
I have to physically know how I walk,
Right.
or look like, in order to make it work, right? And that's like puppetry, right? It's like, I have an image for a thing. It's not a story per se, but I know what it looks like. I'm going to chase that image, and then hopefully you get a series of them, and then you put them together, and then there's now a through line, hopefully, maybe. But trusting to, that the images can be enough, and maybe you're not relying on the verbal, and it's a little more nonverbal, or, a little more nonlinear as opposed to linear, or whatever it might be. But I find the freedom of following the image to be really lovely as well, and I think part of that producing background.
That's great. I love that. And I'm super excited to see the other things that you come up with, and I'm really excited when people are, like you said, the multi-hyphenate facet of our puppetry community is, I think, one of the best parts, where we can have people like you that are making space for people and making stories and making shows that they believe in, and that all relates to, that all relates to itself. So I want to say thank you again for being on the show. It's really great having you here, and hopefully we'll get to talk again soon.
Eric, I appreciate your time too today. Thanks for having me. Thanks for all you do to help prop up the puppetry community. It's really cool to, be amongst like a generation of puppeteers, right, that have like other generations prior to them, right? So we have our Dan Hurlins who are like, you guys, do you know who Eric Wright is? You should know who Eric Wright is. And it's like, okay, cool. I got to learn who Eric Wright is. And, to like be on your show is like pretty cool for me, like in that way of like, a generation to another one and to another one. Like it's cool to like see how we all kind of tie in together in our very small community, but a community nonetheless. And you keep expanding, so I appreciate being invited into your community, and thank you, Katie, too, for having me here today as well. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. I'm sad that Dan didn't say, do you guys know who Katie Denny is? I'm working on it.
I'll make sure to send him that.
Keeping things moving.
Yeah, I'll harass him in that way too. Hopefully he'll figure that out.
He's gonna go, who?
Yeah. I feel like that's what he says about me. Josh, who? Yeah. What? Okay.
Man. Josh, thanks again so much for being here.
Thanks, Eric. I appreciate it, man. Thank you.
We'll talk to you soon.
Bye, everybody.
Well, thanks again, everyone, for being here for another Puppet Time Online. If you want another huge thanks to our guest, Josh Reich. Check out more of what he's doing at joshreichprojects.com. Also, check out the Puppet Pod. Listen to his incredible podcast. You can find all of the podcasts online at this address, and wherever fine podcasts are available, like Spotify or Apple Podcasts. You can find more of the Puppet Kitchen's work at our website and follow us on Instagram. Of course, we're here on YouTube, so be sure to like and subscribe. And you can support this show on our new Patreon page, where you can help us bring more great guests like Josh to the show. And this was our 49th episode.
What?
Of Puppet Time Online. I'm so excited that you all have been here with me, with us for all of this, and super excited for our 50th episode. I teased it a little bit last week, but I'm happy to announce that we're doing a very special 50th episode next week, next Wednesday at 2 p.m. Eastern, where our guest is going to be song and dance man, Jonathan Groff, who played Seymour in the revival of Little Shop of Horrors that I was in. Of course, you also know him as Kristoff from Frozen. He's in Mindhunter. He's a song and dance man. Spring Awakening. What else did Jonathan Groff do?
No, I think song and dance man. I think that's his bio.
So I'm going to introduce him. How else can you introduce that man?
Amazing.
So be sure to tune in next week, Wednesday at 2 p.m. for my interview it's a live interview with Jonathan Groff. So if you want to chime in, that's your chance too, to be a part of that conversation. So we'll see you then Wednesday at 2 p.m. Eastern, right in the middle of the week. And until then, thanks for coming. And just remember, you don't have to do everything to do something. We'll see you next time.